Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Hal Bradley. I would like to ask us, each and every one of you, that if you enjoyed these shows, please hit like, share, and subscribe after you view the show. Thank you very much.
Well, hello, everyone. I wanted to thank you all first off for continuing to enjoy the Crisis Victory Show. And last week I was on an interview on Pete Turner's The Break It Down Show. And what we wanted to do was share that interview that we did last week. Pete and I had a special guest on the air. We had a great topical conversation relating to current events. And we felt that it was a really good idea. We've never done this before. So here we go. And Pete, take it from there.
Boom.
Whoa, folks. My name is Dr. Hal Bradley, and I'd like to personally welcome you to today's episode of the Break It Down Show. Hello, Pete.
Hey, hello. And hello, Ken. Ken's down below me. Ken, I'll throw you in the big window. Thanks for coming on the show, Ken.
Good morning.
Ken and I we talked
evening.
last night. We're covering this the Trump Venezuela stuff because it's important that we talk about these things with the experts that we have here in the Break It Down Show family. So what I want to do is have Ken, who's been a counterintelligence agent, he's been a cop down on the border, he's also been a prosecutor, and so he's looked at this. And then of course my buddy Hal, who, gosh, we just love each other so much. So much fun to have him on the show. But his past was he was a kingpin. He was a drug kingpin. He was a smuggler. He knows this world. Then he went against the cartels and took them on from the point of view of our federal government, saying, "Hey, let's take these guys down and don't let them do this." And now, for the most of his life, he's been a counselor, a chaplain, someone who helps people because he's seen it all, and he doesn't bring judgment to the table, and so he can gather people who are on the edge of life and death. A friend of his died just yesterday with fentanyl and other drug things. So he's the perfect guy to talk about the full stack, from the person who's laying on the ground in his house and he's giving them Narcan to what it is like to deal with the Venezuelan or the Mexican cartels. He knows these people. So this would be a great conversation. Fellas, thank you.
Yeah, nice to see you, Pete. Thank you, brother.
Yeah. Go ahead, Hal. You do it.
Yeah, I'd like to start off first and explain the journey here. What Pete was trying to inform all of you out there, ladies and gentlemen, is that during the late 1960s all the way to the early 1990s, I had affiliations and associations with what is known today as the Sinaloa drug cartel. Back in the day in 1969, when I was a 15-year-old lad, I went down to Mexico to work in a mining camp. With no mom and dad or nobody. I was down there solely on my own, and I got exposed to, at that time, criminal organizations. They were not cartels yet. And I was working and developed a relationship with a kid that was my age, who later became one of the leaders of his family's then and now cartel. Well, many, many years passed. I spent 15 years of my life in the criminal enterprise. Ended up going to Sinaloa, to Culiacan, Sinaloa, to negotiate my final being done with the business. I'd already made my wealth. I had a great wife starting with children. Everything was growing wonderful, and got hands and hug shakes. And I knew these guys since childhood. You know, I was around El Chapo when Chapo and I were just pot smugglers. And that's when he was over there operating out of Jalisco. He wasn't yet developing the Sinaloa cartel. I go all the way back to when Miguel Angel Gallardo, Felix Gallardo, who became the godfather of all the cartels. I remember meeting him on a few occasions on a ranch outside of Guadalajara, where we were picking up and packaging marijuana into our vehicles. This is early 1970s, to give you a time date. By 1989, I was released from Folsom Prison, California, and moved back up to Washington State to get away from it all. I wasn't out 6 months, and I was reapproached by the Sinaloa cartel at that time, flown to Las Vegas, told that I was going to be going back to work whether I liked it or not, basically. So I reestablished all of my chains up north, all the way through Canada, all the way into Alaska, put the markets back together. I was moving a quarter to a third of a ton of cocaine in a month by that time. And I finally hit the breaking point. Didn't want that kind of life to start my children to come up in that. So as I said, I flew to Culiacan, hugs and handshakes. Everybody was happy. I was going to turn over everything to someone that they would send up in representation. And by the time I got home, I had 350 kilos of cocaine sitting in my driveway. Because I wasn't under boss, I had the ability and the power to turn the load around, inform them that we were heated up federally, get it the hell out of here. And the next day walked into the U.S. Attorney's office and made the commitment to take on the drug cartels in the Pacific Northwest region. Primarily, I spent 19 months operational. I was, because I confessed to my crimes, I was dealing with as much as a life sentence. And they said, well, you can work it down from there. After 19 months of operations in multiple foreign countries and the Pacific Northwest, we had done enough damage to where the cost of a kilo of cocaine had accelerated by $2,000 a kilo, to give you an idea of the damage. Now, taking it from that point, I go to federal prison. I'm in Leavenworth. I get recruited by the Department of Justice while in prison, released from prison, and spent, as you know, Pete, the next 17 years of my life as an undercover operative contracting for various agencies under the umbrella of the Department of Justice. I was kidnapped once in Mexico. I was captured in a Central American country, tortured daily. We were rescued. It was a gunfight to get us out of there, but they did get me and the agent that I was inserting into the MS-13 organization at that time. Real tough memories. We thought we were going to die every single day in captivity, and it took them 7 weeks to locate us and ultimately retrieve us. And they literally blew away everybody in the camp to get us out of there, and more power to them. We're home today. The important thing is when I was in federal prison, I started my seminarial studies, graduated seminary under an Assemblies of God tutorship, and became formally ordained. When I got out, I connected with a bishop in Seattle, Washington. Because of my credentials, I was able to reordain under his Pentecostal society. And this is my 26th year of being a pastor and minister in that same theater, if you will, of religion, which is the Christian faith. During that time, Pete, Ken, I would get an occasional phone call, and it would be a call to pack a bag and jump on a plane. You're flying to Central America tomorrow morning. And I had 17 years of operating as a pastor, and the next day or two jumping on a plane and flying to a foreign country to covertly go down there and get involved in criminal enterprises for the purposes of setting them up on a prosecutorial basis to be able to take them down and stop their damage to our country here in the United States. And I would like to say, as I wrap my part up for a few minutes here, is that it was an honor and it was a privilege to not only say that I was sorry for what I had done, but to actually do something about it. And I think this is a critical component to today's conversation that the three of us are going to share together. And as you were talking about, Ken, former prosecutor, former law enforcement agent, he's worked in counterintelligence. You, Pete, you were a spy, among many other things in the military, but you have a high-grade intelligence background also. So I think this conversation today will be informative and based on people that are professionals that truly have the experience from different avenues and different degrees of where this conversation will lead us. And I want to thank you for allowing me that long introduction.
No worries. Ken, jump on in.
I gotta say, I could have there is no possible way for me to have more respect for Dr. Howe than I have, and hearing him talk and say these things, we come from such a diverse background and different sides of this equation, but what a man, what a gentleman, what a scholar, what a disciple. My life, as exciting as it may have seemed, I don't think it matches anything to Hal's. For those of you that haven't seen Hal and I discuss this before, I became a law enforcement officer on the U.S.-Mexico border at 19 years old in the mid-'80s. Was involved in law enforcement in California for about a decade, and then became a U.S. Army counterintelligence special agent. And once I left that position, medically retired, attended law school, practiced privately for about a year, and then started a prosecutorial career that culminated with being an elected prosecutor for the highest per capita crime rate county in the state. So, we come at this from a different angle, sort of tangentially this too, just being a good citizen of my community. I've lived in communities that are served by volunteer fire departments, and I served as a volunteer firefighter for decades, rising up to the level of being an assistant fire chief, and saw the medical side of drug overdoses and drug deaths differently than I saw them as a law enforcement officer, as a first responder, and dealing with that. But got to love this country, got to love this group of people that three gentlemen like ourselves can sit together and have a serious conversation about a serious topic,
Yes.
without making it a personal kind of thing one way or the other, and be respectful of each other. So thanks for bringing us together, Pete, and this is going to be a great conversation.
Hal, I want to ask you.
I'd like to say back
Okay,
to Ken
Yeah.
in retrospect. Ken, I have nothing but respect for you and love for you in my heart. And I want to tell you something, Pete, or Ken, that I really thoroughly enjoyed the honor and privilege of getting to get to know you. You're a hell of a man.
Well, thank you, Doc. Thanks.
This is the thing we do here. We connect people like this, right? And because these guys ought to know each other just personally, but also professionally. This is great. So, Hal, I know one thing about you is that you are not a big fan of Donald Trump. You're very critical. You post critically about him all the time, and that's exactly what you're supposed to do. It's what an American does. You also see the impact of drugs on the ground, and so there is a bit of conflict. I'm curious in how you deal with the fact that the Venezuelan people, the Mexican people, and the way the cartels damage them. These things at the ground level, but politically you're not aligned with the boss and where he's at. How do you reconcile the damage that comes out of those countries because of these cartels and the man who's like, hey, we're going to stop that? How do you deal with that, man?
That's a damn good question. Excuse my language. It really is. But in truth, I'd like to get to the Donald Trump phase. No, I am not a supporter of Donald Trump, but I'm also not inclined anymore to sit there and be combative about his direction, if you will. I said my piece over a period of 3 months, actually doing a political survey. I wanted to see the responses I would get from my audience as well as others. I have my beliefs, but he is the elected president of the United States, regardless of my feelings about how he handles some of his actions. So I want to leave that part to that part. I don't think that contributes to this. I stand with what I believe, as do so many Americans. And you were right in your comment. This is a democracy, and we have a right. But enough being said about that. This is my concern that I see about the Venezuelan attack. Number one, it's a sovereign nation. Number two, in the last year, this is number one out of 7 countries that have had missiles and bombs dropped on them from this presidency. Now, we were told as he went into the presidency that he was going to end all wars in a single day. Ukraine's done, da-da-da-da-da. Well, I've seen exactly the opposite. The thing that concerns me the most about the attack on Venezuela are the allied ties to China and to North Korea. Even Putin has stepped in with regard to the sovereignty of the nation and the sovereignty of that elected president. Right, wrong, or indifferent. The other thing that concerns me about the attack is it was supposedly based on all of his narcotics trafficking. This was the main theme. I know I'm right on this because I follow it every day. Well, number one, Venezuela doesn't produce and manufacture drugs. It's primarily cocaine. Number two, China doesn't filter fentanyl through Venezuela. Fentanyl comes in through the Mexican ports and then is distributed through the Mexican cartels. That's at least 90% of the fentanyl that comes into the United States, by the way. And I know this from that world of being in that world. So my concern about attacking a sovereign nation and now making comments about looking at taking on Cuba and watching the uproar in Greenland as a direction is also looking at that. These are sovereign nations, gentlemen. These are not rampant territories that do not have elected officials in position to monitor and maintain their own country. We can't be going in there and saying, yeah, we're going to put our government people in there on a part-time basis, and by the way, we'll take over all of your oil refinery in that country, because one of my commitments to the oil companies when I became president was I was going to expand on them. How the hell do you think the world looks at all of that, gentlemen? How do you think that doesn't expose us to other forms of a probable attack? And I'm not talking physically. I'm talking technologically. I'm talking politically. I'm talking about a foundation based on what I believe to be a corrupted foundation, based on seizing oil tankers that are coming out of Venezuela, blowing up fishing boats, saying they've all got drugs on them. Gentlemen, we've all seen the cam photo or the video photos of those boats. I did see one that had packages on it that were reminiscent to that type of narcotics smuggling into the United States. I've also seen film footage that was done where they were fishing boats. So wherein do we halt the non-humanitarian basis, if you will, of this present assault on a sovereign nation? Should we not be more investigative? Pete and Ken, I heard that we had the CIA involved with this down there in Venezuela. That's a good thing. I've worked at the CIA. I know damn good and well how thorough they are. So I'm saying from that standpoint of knowledge that they probably had some pretty graphic intel that was given to them that led them to believe that the assault would be a positive inevitability. On the global forum, I'm watching reports now popping in on my various media channels that I follow, and the world is exploding in outrage right now over a sovereign nation and the president of that nation being literally kidnapped right out of his home and flown into another country for prosecution. Gentlemen, comments?
Well, a couple things come to mind right away, Hal, and the first is, you talked a little bit about, Trump coming in and promising to end wars overnight and everything else. And I agree, he did say those things. And
yes, he did.
A lot of it was aspirational, but it also came to mind the old adage that he's accomplishing is the hard we can do overnight, the impossible may take a little longer. And
I agree.
With a lot of those things. And I think his intentions are absolutely spot on. Now let's break down legalistically some of the things that you talked about. And Pete's admonished me to learn how to be a little bit briefer. I've told
Yeah, I tried to stop there a minute or two ago, but it's hard.
Getting a lawyer to talk isn't the hard part. Getting him to shut up is the hard part. First couple things. You mentioned the oil tankers. President Trump is the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, period. He delegates a lot of those powers to his attorney general and through his agency heads, but by our constitution and our laws, he's the chief law enforcement officer. So warrants have been issued for those tankers for their seizures. What's a warrant? Well, that's that third branch of government, the judiciary, the one that people like to hide behind when it serves their purposes and oppose when it doesn't serve their purposes. But any warrant, and I'm sure in the course of your life, you've had the opportunity to look at a warrant issued for somebody.
Oh, yeah.
It says that the court commands any law enforcement officer in receipt of this to execute this warrant, whether it's to take somebody into custody or seize a piece of property. So I don't think that there's anything extra legal about the President of the United States as chief law enforcement officer seizing a piece of property that a federal court, a separate branch of the United States government, a co-equal branch, has ordered him to seize. So that takes care of that portion as far as I'm concerned. There's nothing extra legal about seizing a piece of property, be it a ship or a car or anything else that a court has ordered the chief executive or the law enforcement officer, not just ordered, commanded. That's the language that's used on the words, commanded him to seize. Going into a sovereign nation, legitimate, I think there's plenty of questions that surround the legitimacy of Maduro being in office. I would propose to you and proffer that the Nobel Committee is no fan of Donald J. Trump, is no fan overall of the United States, and certainly is not a fan of militaristic type of actions. However, the Nobel Committee is as liberal as that organization is, declared that the opposition leader was the rightful president and gave her the Nobel Peace Prize. And right. Maduro had stolen that presidency and had, stacked the ballot boxes and truly using that socialistic phrase that Mao made so popular is that all political power comes from the tip of the gun. And he seized control of that even after he'd lost power. So I think there's some questions there. I think there's always concerns by Americans, and they wouldn't be a good American if they didn't have concerns about any time we intervene in a foreign country. We shouldn't do that willy-nilly. We shouldn't do that loosely. So I think it's right to question these things. But I think in this case, we have a third branch of government, being the U.S. courts, that not only commanded our president to seize those vessels, but commanded the president as law enforcement officer to take Maduro into custody. You are commanded. That's what the warrant that was issued for him by the Southern District Grand Jury in the Southern.
I agree with you on that. I do.
So how is
about the language of the warrant?
Yeah. Now let's loop back to one thing that you and I are both going to understand. You and I have talked about this before. We've talked about the tragedy occurred when DEA agents, Special Agent Kiki Camarena, was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. Terrible moment in history for those of us that worked on the border, that knew members of the Camarena family. That I never knew Kiki personally, knew members of his family. However, if you'll remember afterwards, some of the people that were involved in that mysteriously ended up back on the U.S. side of the border.
I do.
Without getting too many specifics, I think, and I think you know this too, there were DEA agents and other members of U.S. law enforcement that left their badges north of the border and went south and grabbed some of these people and brought them back.
Absolutely.
Well, that, of course, went to court. That was challenged, and at a point in time, and I don't have the case citation off the top of my head, the U.S. courts basically said, we don't care how they got to the United States. There's a warrant out for their arrest in the United States. And so that jurisdictional point is moot. They're here. We're going to deal with it. I'll end it for there. I'm sure we can continue on, and we will with other things. But in the sense of giving Pete some direction and brevity, I'll end it there.
Well, I want to get to so Ray Duggan, fellow CIA agent, wanted you to talk a little bit about sovereignty. Read that real quick and see if your lawyer brain wants to answer anything more on that.
Yeah, I mean, sovereignty is not sovereignty to the individual in the case of this. So is it a still sovereign nation? I think there's no question that Venezuela is a sovereign nation. It has borders, it has laws, it has those things. It's recognized by the United Nations.
It has government.
It has a government, whether it's a functioning government or a corrupt narco government, that's up for debate. So I think that sovereignty exists there. Was this person the rightful, lawful, and just leader of that sovereign nation? I think that the evidence that I've seen says no, he was not, and that he was holding that country hostage at the tip of a gun, at the threat of force, and supported by illegal organizations that were fueling him. We can debate whether or not the drug trade, and I don't disagree with anything Hal said about the mechanisms of the drug trade, about the involvement in Venezuela, and I certainly do not disagree about where fentanyl is originating, where it's being prepared, and where it's being marketed. That is an absolute fact, and anybody that doesn't understand that is blind to that. Fentanyl is a Chinese scourge being put upon the United States.
Can I make a comment, Ken? Can I make a comment? It'll fit this perfectly right now. You were talking about Chairman Mao and the comment that Mao made. Well, back in the 1950s, Chairman Mao Zedong told the world, "I will take over the United States of America without firing a single shot through the decadence of the youth." Now think about that. Now, what did he do when he started sending, or not he, excuse me, when the elements from China started introducing the fentanyl market into Mexico for distribution into the United States without firing a single shot? Look at the hundreds of thousands of Americans that have died from fentanyl overdose, and look at how the fentanyl market has transitioned the actual drug trade. Right. In my time, Ken, it was marijuana, heroin, and cocaine. That's what came across those borders. And heroin wasn't even a big play of it. I was in the military during the Vietnam War. A lot of China white heroin was coming out of Thailand, primarily to the East Coast, and would filter across the states. The introduction of heroin started down in Texas, Arizona, and California. That's how it started marketing, and you're well aware of that because you worked on the other side of the law that I was on at that time.
Yeah.
So my thing is this: we were going to go into the fentanyl discussion today, and this was a prime opportunity to interject with you, brother, because of the comments about Chairman Mao. He has figured out a way to assault the United States without firing a single shot, and we're not talking about their technologies. Jesus Christ, that's a whole nother conversation. But look at what fentanyl has done, and we're only talking. What is it, Ken? 10 years, 11 years,
if that?
If that. We've got a decade in the fentanyl world, and look at the crisis that it has delivered to our country. And think about the overpowering that it's doing to our law enforcement agencies. Think about the financial drain, besides the death rate.
Well, and again, I'm a history guy, and I think back, and you talk about U.S. involvement in sovereign countries, you talk about China, and you talk about illicit narcotics. People are
Yes.
quick to forget that we had U.S. forces involved in China prior to World War I in what was known as the
The
Boxer
Opium Wars.
and that was
Boxer
an
Republic.
opium war.
Yep.
That was a
Sure
war
was.
for the exportation of opium outside of China. Now, other nations were very much involved in it. The British were heavily involved. The Chinese
Very much.
delegation, the Italians, the Japanese, everybody was there involved. But we're talking about extraterritorial intervention in a sovereign nation over drugs. This is not new to the United States. This is not a reinvention of the wheel. And it's not unusual in the United States throughout our history, beginning in the 1890s, interjected ourselves in the sovereignty of other countries when it was in our national interest, including in Mexico on several occasions, both in the late 1800s and during the punitive expeditions in the 1914, 1916 era, when General Blackjack Pershing led what was known as the punitive expedition into Mexico for a lot less than what has occurred on the border recently. So I know everybody's on the top of the news with Venezuela. It's
But you know what, Ken? His argument. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. But his principal argument was, we're going to stop Venezuela from doing the flow of drugs into the United States. That is my primary purpose. Correct or not?
I think that's what publicly has been put forward.
Okay, but we know the oil is the play. The other thing is, then, if he's so into narco-terrorism and taking these guys down, why the hell did he just release a guy that our Justice Department spent over 2 years prosecuting, who was the president of the Honduras, who was convicted and confirmed to have brought over 400 tons of cocaine into our country? Can you please explain to me and this audience why he would release a man that smuggled 400 tons of cocaine in here, and yet he's saying that his war with Venezuela is over drugs? That doesn't even make sense.
One thing Pete and I both learned over time is sometimes the commanders know things that we don't know. And what I've read and seen about that particular pardon in that situation, there was some, what in the military we'd call undue command influence on the prosecution. And there was a thumb, at least I think in President Trump's view, a thumb put on the scale for political purposes that took care of that. But here's the difference.
How convenient.
Yeah, well, I mean, and
come on, 400 tons of cocaine, that's a lot of damage, brother.
But
I was looking at a lot. I was moving a quarter of a ton a month or a third of a ton a month, and I was looking it up to life. Yeah.
But here's something, Hal, that I throw back at you and everything else.
Okay.
Obama administration put sanctions and warrants and things on the Chavez Maduro regime and organization.
Right.
The first round with President Trump did the same thing. One of the last acts that occurred under the Biden administration was to increase the amount of the bounty on the head of Maduro.
Right. I remember that.
But here's the difference, Hal. This president doesn't just give lip service to things. He does what he says he's going to do. He may not always do it as quickly as he'd like to, we've seen, but as opposed to a lot of politicians, and this is not a Republican Democrat issue, this is not a conservative liberal issue.
I agree.
A lot of them have given lip service over the years to this stuff. I think what we're seeing in this era and this presidency is that he's going to actually don't do it unless you're going to do it. Don't put a warrant out for somebody unless you want me to arrest him. Don't put a bounty on somebody's head unless you want me to get them and bring them back. And we've become, for lack of a better term, we're not used to that anymore. We're not used to somebody saying what they mean and meaning what they said, and then carrying out and acting on that. And
Point
so
taken. I like that.
Yeah, I think in general, this public is a little taken back from it. And it's not just these things. I think when he said, hey, NATO, pony up. We're tired of carrying the weight. As a former NATO, a soldier assigned to NATO for 3 years, know very much. NATO doesn't exist absent the United States. The other countries just don't have the capacity and the capabilities to do what we can do. And so he put the pressure on, and you know what? All of a sudden, they all started to pony up because they knew he meant what he said and that he was going to take actions if he didn't. And I think there's an adjustment period we're all going through, adapting to that type of leadership. And I appreciate that type of leadership. I would rather someone be straight with me, and I really know what they're saying, and if they say they're going to do it, they're going to do it. Sec def, love him, or sec war, love him, hate him, whatever people think about him. I think he had it around right in the news conference when he said, "F around and find out."
I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, and and you know what, brother, I love that we can both be so objective to so many things, but I do want to focus on certain personal or intentional goals that are not necessarily to the benefit of the United States of America. I don't care what the hell excuses there are. A man that moved 400 tons of cocaine into my country, that my system, my Department of Justice, my country, the State Department, spent years developing, years amassing evidence, and all of it's thrown right out the window for whatever unknown reasons. And I do believe that in my heart. There's more to that ball than we're seeing in the public eye. And I'm just saying that, don't tell me you're some guy hell-bent on stopping narco trafficking when you're letting a guy that brought 400 tons of cocaine into my country that I served in the military to defend and protect, and a constitution. There was no congressional involvement. This was a goddamn executive order, and bang, here we are. But I did like what you said about one thing, Ken. Do what you're going to say you're going to do. Be a man of action. And I really respect that. I got you on that when you put that to the audience here. I'm saying that there is a system that is set into play. There's a three-form government we have. And you know what? We need to be using that also. Now, granted, Trump does act on what he says, and sometimes Congress or even the Senate will hold up action that needs to be, or we deem necessary, to follow through. That is why we do have the executive order initiative that a president has the option to use. So in that regard, brother, I'm 100% in your corner. I see that. But I'm also saying that, we have these other two systems of government set up for checks and balances. They need to be honored. They need to be respected. The founding fathers of our country brought this country together out of a tyrannical British government and created a sovereign nation of its own on these soils that we love and we all cherish and we revere so deeply.
I don't agree with anything you're saying, Hal. I think that this system and our system, we've allowed it to become broken.
I agree. I agree with you completely.
Let me grab the reins here, fellas. Let me grab the reins here because I want to get us closer back to the topic. When the United States goes into Venezuela and says, "Hey, you're not going to rob these people. You're not going to move this oil to our adversaries. You are going to stop dealing drugs in boats." Whatever it is, like that we want to believe about that. That's what they say, and the foreign policy is set. What is Mexico going to do? How are the cartels going to respond? Because they have to do something. How they can't just continue to think business as normal. What are your thoughts on how this is going to impact regionally? And I'm saying Mexico.
Oh, I love this question. I love this question. I'll tell you exactly what's happening.
Subject matter expert to speak about it. Tell us how.
I love you, Ken. And I'm going to speak about it. I was a smuggler for years. And you know what? You have to change your avenues of activity in accordance to the way law enforcement starts to approach. Back in my day, we didn't have sensory devices in the canyon walls that were between Arizona and Sonora State, where I used to fly my plane loads through that canyon. That didn't happen until the late 1970s. And by that time, I was getting ready to get out of the smuggling game. So what happens is this, gentlemen, things evolve. People are saying the cartels are getting hammered and sliced and diced and all that. Have either one of you noticed any fluctuation in the amount of drugs that are on the streets? Tell me, have you?
I have no idea.
Yeah, no idea. Because there isn't. You know what they do? We find another way and scale up our way of bringing it into the United States. It's as simple as that. And that's exactly what the cartels have now modernated themselves into, Pete and Ken. We've got cargo container ships that come into this country every single day. And I learned this when I was working during my years at the U.S. Customs Service. There are mandated cargo containers that are put on boat that by reputable companies, they're never inspected. What is it, Ken? 3% out of a standard shipment is inspected?
If that.
But I think that's what the term.
The total.
Yeah, 3% of the total. I think that's exactly the stats that I had when I was working in that industry with law enforcement. So here you go. All you got to do is be able to tag into someone that has a reputation of always delivering legal and legitimate goods to the United States, and you can pack those containers from top to bottom full of product, and they're going to drive right off that boat and right down into America's roads. I am on the streets. I work with addicts out here in the public, ladies and gentlemen. 20 years I've been doing this, and I'll guarantee you, if anything, I see more out there than I did 2 and 3 years ago. So no, we are not impacting. And yes, the cartels are thriving just fine. They have found another way to do it. And you remember what La Cosa Nostra did when they first came to the country in the 19 teens and built the families? They said, we will become invisible. The Chapo Guzmans are gone. The Chapo Guzmans of the days of the great fame and glory, that's all gone. I knew El Chapo. I remember him and his attitude very, very well. And you know what? Those guys are all knocked down, like they're knocked over. They're gone. What we have now are people that are invisible. And this, brothers, is
that's a more dangerous adversary and a more challenging. But I will tell you, I think Hal, as usual, is spot on. You know, he knows this game and he knows what's going on. But I'll tell you some things that I think are changing and are going to change. I think adversaries of the United States, whether they be political, military, or criminal adversaries, are reevaluating their position right now. I think every person that still thinks they're going to get around signals intelligence and surveillance by carrying a pager rethought carrying a pager after the Israeli use of the pager bombs on Hezbollah. Yeah. I think that there is some significant reevaluation. Now, here's the problem. And Hal, I know you're going to agree with me on this, and I'm going to be free and loose with what I say. The root problem is the weakness of the human being and the weakness of humankind, that we continue to consume intoxicants, whether it be alcohol, fentanyl, cocaine, marijuana. That market is not going away anytime soon. And that market is not going to be squashed by military action, legal action, and those types of things. Unfortunately, Americans have a long history with our intoxicants. I talked to Pete earlier today. We were just talking off the cuff, looking at stuff, and they said, back, what was the first internal military action after the Revolutionary War that really occurred? What was called the Whiskey Rebellion. And what were we doing? We were rebelling against whiskey taxation and whiskey production.
And also getting hammered and going and fighting.
That's right. We have what's now come into our top 3 national pastimes, which is an event that derived from the illegal production and distribution of alcohol, and that being NASCAR. It is now more popular in a lot of areas and things. And where did that come from? That came from our addiction to illegal or legal, however you look at them, intoxicants. You brought up La Cosa Nostra. What brought La Cosa Nostra their power that really entrenched them for 100 years?
Invisibility.
Prohibition. It was us trying to control illegal or make illegal intoxicants. The human frailty and the weakness of the human mind and the human spirit that wants to continue when necessary to consume these intoxicants is what drives it. It starts here at home. The idea of cocaine and cocaine smuggling in the United States did not originate in Colombia and Peru. It originated in the United States. The smuggling up through Mexico, the market fentanyl, demand. Those things, it all originated with our own human frailty and weakness.
Well, Ken, you were right about one thing. I do agree with you 100%. you hit it right on the head, brother. And that's a problem that I don't see going away in the foreseeable future, brother. What I see is supply and demand. It's always been supply and demand, but it's also invisibility. And this is something new to the cartels. They've never been afraid to be out and seen and noticed. That was their power, if you think about it, because they could control by example, and examples were always in the media forefront. Now it's different, and it's transitioning, and it's changing. And if you're monitoring law enforcement activity right now with regard to takedowns and the process of how we're taking it into the courts, for God's sakes, down there in Mexico, they're kidnapping their own people and flying them up here to cut deals. So what's happening? The generation that's coming up in the cartels, they're becoming invisible. They're hiding from that. And it's not fear. It's intelligence. You have to evolve to survive.
Yeah, the archetype of the cartel leader of the drug cartel. I mean, if you want to look at the archetype that people modeled themselves after for quite a while, was the Pablo Escobar.
Absolutely.
And what did Pablo do? He was out front. I mean, he ran for president. I mean, he was a member of the Congress. You know, he threw the money around to build up a Robin Hood image, and he was very much upfront about it. And in the end, it was what was used against him in signals intelligence to track him down and get him. And to this day, Pablo's braggadocious nature and his need to be out in the open is affecting not only the people of Colombia, but the environment. Because what do you have? You have Pablo's hippopotamuses that are overrunning areas of Colombia and decimating the local environment.
I saw that on the news recently.
And you know, what are hippopotamuses doing in Colombia? It was feeding Pablo's ego. And then, you know, these people that you were associated with in Mexico, they took off after that, and they were into these public displays of violence to hold their positions. The Tijuana nightclub massacres, the different things that occurred and went on. And here in the United States, we have the Teflon Don in New York City, who broke all the rules of La Cosa Nostra and Omerta, and was out there and out front doing that, and brought the heat down on organized crime in New York, so that the Rudy Giuliani's and those that came after him were able to more easily target him because they're out in the open.
Absolutely right.
Much rather be combating a group than somebody that's operating under the radar, or as in our former careers that Pete and I would refer to as the illegals, or people operating under illegal cover. They weren't, you know, you used to know who the KGB residencia was, the resident agent in the embassies. He wasn't that well concealed, but you didn't know who all the KGB illegals that were operating under non-official cover were, and those were the ones that were most challenging to combat.
Well, brothers, as I was stating earlier to both of you, we don't see no cutting back on drug consumption in this country at all, based on all these attacks and based on all these arrests and all of these convictions that we're watching going on. And these are powerful convictions. But I'm here to tell you right now, there's a hell of a lot going on that the public isn't seeing, that we don't know about. I've been out of the smuggling part of it for a lot of years now. I can only understand the concept of evolving, because I remember when Chapo was starting to can cocaine in cans and putting labels on it and getting it through. And the next thing you know, we've got chessboard sets coming on out of there, and the center of the chessboards were laden with it. And, you know, they evolved. They found other ways to get things through the customs the scenario. I remember my car when the first dog ever sniffed my car when it was fully loaded with marijuana. And you know what they did? They dipped my marijuana, and they dipped it in a liquid solution, a pepper solution that we can't smell, but was sensitive to a damn dog. And, you know, they put that in my car, and I went right on through, no problem, you know. And but the point is this, gentlemen, they evolved. They found another way. And, you know, a lot of these loads, Ken, you know this better than anybody, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I know I'm not. There are a lot of loads that are intentionally taken off at the border that other loads can get right on through behind it, right or wrong.
Certainly. Absolutely. Very much a tactic used by the cartel. But I want to ask you a question, Hal, because, you know, and we're talking about this totality of the drug trade and the international effect of it. And for a long time, the U.S. started to go after what we called source countries. We were going after the actual coca production, Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, and those areas. We were doing things to hit it at the source. So let's get back around to fentanyl, which I think, you know, fentanyl scares me to death, and it scares me to death for my brothers and sisters that are still in law enforcement, because fentanyl is the first drug that on a regular basis is killing law enforcement officers just because of incidental contact with it and everything else. I mean, fentanyl is a dangerous drug. There's one source country for fentanyl. There's a processing that goes through in Mexico. There's a marketing, there's a packaging, and the smuggling. But all these precursors, everything that makes fentanyl what fentanyl is all coming out of China. How do you see, you know, us going forward and looking at the big geopolitical landscape that you understand? How do we go after the source country? How do we really start cracking down when they're just fulfilling Mao's promise to take us out without firing a shot?
Pete, that one's directed to you, brother.
No, that was right at you, Hal.
Oh, that's for you,
was
man.
it?
Yeah.
You know, I think this is where it has to enter into a diplomatic and political forum, because I think what we have to do is identify and target the fentanyl producers in China, and what can we do to make China stop an allowance of that to be able to be done in the first place. And when we enter into that, this is where we have to have a diplomatic arena to take the approach. Law enforcement is not going to be able to take it out. For one, it's in China. For another, they know how to get it over to Mexico. It's done in other ways besides on transport ships. Hell, that's flown in. There's other avenues that it gets to us. So that's not the curative to it. What we've got to do in a case like that, and I love how you brought up we were going to the sources in Bolivia and Peru and Colombia, and we were taking out the growing and all of the operations that made cocaine. Didn't work at all. Had no real effect at all. But the point is this. This is where the diplomatic arena comes into play, and we have to find something that can satisfy or possibly even saturate, if you will, the desire to recreate another form of product that is demandable, where they can see their finances, because everything is monetarily based. Every single product out there is based on money. So what do? How do we attack the fentanyl thing? That is my answer to that. You're going to have to go into a political arena and allow diplomacy to interact at that point. You're not going to stop the companies that manufacture the different components and ingredients that are necessary to create fentanyl in the first place. They're just going to go into shadow operations, and they're going to continue to do it. So what you have to do is find an alternative or a replacement, if you will, of it. The problem is what you said earlier, Ken, the demand. Yeah. American people will absolutely not stop demanding that which makes them feel good. Look at the speakeasies of during the era of when alcohol was illegal in our country. What do? They made it invisible. They put speakeasies right in the heart of public, and people went and used them. Same thing with drugs. It's no different.
Yeah, it's a real game of whack-a-mole. I mean, you hit it one place, you put pressure on another place. 20 years ago, when methamphetamine production in the United States was probably at its peak, we did attack those precursor chemicals and those precursor substances. And we did stop, for the most part, the manufacture of methamphetamine in the United States, but it just shifted. It shifted down south, and now we have wholesale manufacturing of methamphetamine in Mexico in places. And so, we put the pressure one place and it pops back up something else. But what do we do? I mean, I'm going to keep on this line with you. How do you satiate and how do you deal with China? One of the things Pete and I learned in our lives and in dealing with people overseas, and you've probably seen the same thing, is that people outside the United States, no matter what Americans want to believe, do not think like we do.
Not at all. I've got 17 years undercover out of the States. You're right. They don't. And they really don't care. That's the problem with that. What they're caring about is an economic growth in their own. That's what they care. But they capitalize. They capitalize on our disease.
Yeah. How do we convince the Chinese then? I don't think there's fentanyl problem in China. They wouldn't tolerate it. There's not.
Absolutely not.
And everything else. Fentanyl production exists to attack the United States. So is there any pressure points that you know of, or any things that you can think of that we can use with China to get them to stop providing the precursor chemicals? The precursor chemicals back in the day for cocaine production were coming out of the Eastern Bloc. I've seen photos and videos before of East German tankers, East German flag tankers delivering chemicals to Colombia and Peru and places like that for cocaine processing. So they certainly weren't using cocaine to any extent in East Germany. So how do we convince? What pressure points do we have to get the Chinese to stop doing this?
Well, I love the point you made, Ken, about seeing that they don't have an interim problem with fentanyl within their own country. So how do they prevent that from happening? They shift it to another country. Simple as that, for the marketing. And then if they catch you with that in their own country, that's probably a death sentence over there. Probably. But the only way I can see where we can attack the fentanyl mass production that we see coming from China before it's reprocessed into usable product here in the United States is in a diplomatic way. We have to offer them something greater We have to offer them a reason and a purpose to eradicate it in their own boundaries. If we don't do that, we're not going to stop that. And I believe that completely. That's going to be the only way we're going to capitalize on taking out the fentanyl game from China, the originating source. And another thing, guys, how come other countries aren't now doing what China's been doing for the last decade and a half? How come we don't see other manufacturing countries? I don't know of another country manufacturing the basic components and putting them together for fentanyl. Only China. Go figure, huh?
Yeah, crazy. When we look how at the cost on the streets, this is what I'm going to talk to the crisis counselor in you, the pastor who takes in people, who feeds the homeless, people addicted to drugs, there's people in families that are fighting addiction right now. What does that guy need that he doesn't have day to day? What do you need to help? Not just more Narcan, man, but like, how do we improve the condition of people so that there is less pull from drugs? Because we love the fuck out of drugs, legal or otherwise.
I love that question, Pete, and it's the greatest question that's been asked today with regard to the intentional crisis that we're seeing with the youth and the people that are involved. What I do is I tell people there's two things that you must do. These two things have to be done, or the circle of your misery and your agony and your suffering is never going to come to an end. One is people, and the other is environment, gentlemen. And until we can convince a person to change the people that they assimilate themselves into and the environment that they associate themselves with, we're not going to be able to transform them. I've seen people go through the rehabilitation facilities and come right out and they do good for a week or two, but what do? They go back to that which is familiar, the environment and the people. And brothers, this is where they have to make the transition themselves. We can only suggest it. As you know, Pete, I've been doing this for 20 years, working every day of my life with people that deal with addiction and deal with sexual abuse and deal with all kinds of horrific things that they survive. But what happens, guys, is that they become familiar with it. And when you become that familiar in a strange source, it becomes comfortable. You're comfortable with your pain. You're comfortable with your addiction. And why? Because you know it so well. And until we can transition them into a modicum of thinking that eliminates that desirous path, if you will, that they return themselves back into, we're never going to cure them. And I've got 2 decades of working every day in this, and I know what I'm talking about. And I see it. And I see people that suffer greatly, but they're familiar with it, guys, and they're comfortable with it because they know it. And it's almost like they're afraid to try and step away from that. The other thing about dealing with homelessness is you have no responsibilities to anybody except your own self on how you're going to get a meal that day, or how you're going to get a place to sleep that night, or how you're going to get the drugs that you feel that you need to get through your day. They don't have no responsibility. So how do we reintegrate responsibility into their lives? How do we convince them that the purpose of better life comes with responsibilities, a chain of command to your own self, if you will? But they don't have to do any of that because they are not responsible for anything. And this is the problem that I deal with when I'm in counseling with people that are struggling with, why can't I break the chain of my addiction? And then you get the survivors that do, and they come forth and they share a beautiful story. They share a story of, I can relate to you because I was there 2 or 3 years ago or 10 years ago, or whatever the case may be in that regard. But what they see and what they reflect to me, these are the successful survivors now. They'll reflect back to me and say, Pastor, until they transition to removing themselves from the people and that environment, they're never going to fix. And that's the hardest stumbling block that we find with dealing with the addicted community out there. The people, Ken, that sit there and keep supporting the cartels because of their consumption addiction.
Right.
And, once we tackle, and I loved earlier, Ken, when you brought that up about how the addictive society that we have is why these cartels will always be strong, because they're supply and demand. That's the basic rudimentary of the humanitarian life of living in that type of an environment. But what if we can change the environment? What if there's another option that we can integrate people into that would show them that now we desire this and now we're becoming comfortable with this? And we haven't done that yet. I'm around rehab facilities. I've sat in on lots of them and studied them and examined them and looked at them and trying to find solutions and answers to work in my own community that I can benefit and bring back to this community. And brother, it's the same thing every single time. And they need a lot more time than 30-day incarceration or even a 90-day. Thank you, Ken, for shaking your head on that, because you're in law enforcement, you know it. And that's exactly what the problem is. We don't have enough time to filter them into another directive, if you will, because the old habits reattach as soon as you get back into what? People and environment right away.
You are so spot on. So, when I retired from the Army and before I started law school, I spent a year teaching at the penitentiary. And during that time, teaching adult education classes, I started doing a little bit of a study of recidivism because I was challenged by my students. You don't know what it's like to be addicted to something.
Yeah.
And I found the works of Dr. Simon Samanow, and I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I've heard the name. I'm trying to place it, but yeah.
Dr. Simon Samanow wrote a series of books, but the epitome book, the top one, is called Inside the Criminal Mind. And he was the psychiatrist at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., and he spent years studying people's criminal thinking and what causes them to recidivate and continue to commit crimes or to stay in a life of crime. And it came down to, in his theory that he put forward, exactly what Dr. Howell just said, which is if you go back to the same place with the same people, inevitably you will end up doing the same things. Yeah. And the only way you break that chain of recidivism is to consciously remove yourself from those influences that either brought you there in the first place or trap you within that system, because like Dr. Howell said, the comfort that an individual may eat by doing it. So you're spot on. If you go back to the same place with the same people, inevitably you're going to do the same thing. And real change comes by you making the choice to remove yourself from those influences and start anew.
Another thing too, Ken, is the people like ourselves that work in those environments. I worked trap houses for 14 or 15 years, and I finally hit a point where it was too hard on me to walk into a house and look at a couch with 13, 14, and 15-year-old females waiting for their turn to go into a back bedroom and trade their body for a $20 hit. It got to me when I would sit at a kitchen table and be there just for comfort and counsel if it was requested, watching 3 kids share the same needle and nod out right there at the kitchen table, and then later revive themselves and start crying because their self-esteem is completely gone. And I have almost 15 years of doing that, 14 for sure. Yeah, say 15 years of looking at that. And I finally hit a burnout point where I couldn't look at another young girl going in a back bedroom to trade her body. I couldn't sit at a kitchen table and watch 3 kids share that same rig. I just couldn't do it. I finally hit a point and I got out of it. Pete, about 2-3 years ago? I told you when
Yeah.
So it's been recent in my life. And now that I've been away from that, I am no longer, Ken, I'm no longer comfortable with going back into that.
No.
So everybody
never comfortable with it. You can't. It's very difficult to get that comfort level, and I think that's that syndrome of trauma fatigue, that you're around that trauma so much that you start being accepted of it, and I think it's important. But I want to throw up this back at you because I want to drill down on this fentanyl thing, because I think it is the most dangerous scourge that we've seen in our lifetimes when it comes to this illegal narcotics. It's more dangerous now. More dangerous than cocaine, even I think more dangerous than methamphetamine. As bad as methamphetamine is, and as many lives as it destroyed. I've been thinking for the last few minutes, Hal, about what you said about applying political pressure and diplomatic means to stop that. And I'm thinking back in the history of narcotics, and the closest thing I can come up to with where that's ever been successful is maybe the pressure we put on Turkey and the carrot and the stick approach with the entry into NATO and the securing of Turkey, and we were able to shut down the Turkish connections and
yes.
Those kinds of things. But can you think of any other way? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I believe
I'm glad you are. I'm sitting here, Ken, thinking about your very questions as you're presenting them. And the first thing that came to my mind, and this is based on 17 years of being an undercover operative in many different foreign countries, working with governments of those countries, working with agency people in those countries. And it all boils down to one thing. What can you do to replace the equation that will satisfy those that are causing the greatest problem? Now in China, we're talking about the fentanyl thing, and why hasn't it expanded into other countries to produce it, to get it over to Mexico, to get it to the American market, which, by the way, is the largest consumption market in the world. Australia comes pretty close, but we're it. But the point is this: the only other way would be military action. I mean, if you really want to know it, and maybe covert military action.
Yeah,
Identify the target. I learned this through the CIA. You identify a target, you simply eradicate the target. It is that easy.
But when you talk cocaine production and even the marijuana production, the economic point of that, where it was bringing economic success and stability to poorer people and people that were
to regions
to do that. And I can see exactly what you're saying. And we found ways to replace that economic incentive to these people by alternating, what other crops can you grow? What other businesses can you get into? What can replace that income that you're going to lose if we stop this trade? But that doesn't seem to be an issue with China, because we're not replacing the income of individual peasants or farmers or anything like that. This is a government-run operation.
Oh, yeah. Mao Zedong told us that in the 1950s. How he was going to do it. He said, I'm going to attack their decadence. And that's exactly what is going on with this. And, but gentlemen, I want to keep going back to the point that I made a few minutes ago. Why isn't some other country doing the same thing that China is doing? The money is magnificent.
What's your supposition? What's your theory on it?
I think that I think that there would be people that would take out any competition that would start up any other place. And that's what I firmly believe. That's like Don Pablo Escobar. I was actively involved during his reign. Look what he did to anybody that started setting up that was outside of his control. China probably has the same applied principle. Gentlemen, you both worked in counterintelligence and intelligence. You know full well that what goes on that the public doesn't ever find out about. So do I. I worked in that around the agencies myself, and people simply disappear all the time because it's a need that protects our borders. And I stand with it, and I agree with it completely. I've seen it firsthand. And that's what I think that's going on with China. Why aren't other countries? I brought that up to you 4 times. I've been keeping track. 4 times I've said, why aren't other countries producing it when they see China does it? My answer is I think that if they start up doing it, they're eliminated. They're taken out right away.
Great question. I'd never thought of it before and didn't look at it that way. And I think it's a great question. I think it's something we need to definitely ponder and look on. But I think that even more may be the case that it supports the proposition that this is a global political fight and a global political effort on the part of China, and not as much a monetary and economic engine driving as it was for the Medellin cartel, the Cali cartel, the Sinaloa cartel, and these others.
I agree with you.
Bringing it up, the motivations are different, and that again, how do you reassess and re-challenge those motivations to attack it? So, you've seen on the street the effect that this has, and who would have ever thought that we would have to carry around Narcan with us. Narcan back in the day in the 80s, Narcan was there. I mean, I've seen many a person come up fighting off the stretcher when that medic out in the field, the paramedic, hit them with a shot of Narcan, and they come up swinging. You stood back because you.
Oh yeah, I've dealt with that. Firsthand.
You knew they were going to come up swinging, but the individual law enforcement officer, the individual firefighter, didn't have that requirement, because as bad as heroin was, and how bad the propensity to overdose was that existed, it wasn't that instantaneous fatality that we see with a bad hot hit of this. And
you hit a good point, Ken, when you're talking about the exposure to the first responders, to law enforcement agents that are dealing with the fentanyl project. If they aren't prepped and they don't recognize that this might be a potential fentanyl package or something, they open that up, they're dead. They're gone. And it happens on our border every single day. They don't die, but they certainly get Narcan hit or helicoline hits or whatever to bring them back. But it happens every day. They open. Go ahead.
You've seen it in your career. Hollywood was good at this and publicizing it. I never saw a cop stick a knife into a kilo and pull it out and taste it to see whether or not.
I didn't either.
Good stuff. That is so Hollywood.
Yeah, I didn't either.
And any law enforcement officer who did that wouldn't be long for the profession. And I never knew of any traffickers that did it either. So all those that are watching it that think that there's some reality and that switchblade comes out and goes into the kilo and comes out and we're tasting it to see it,
I've seen field testing done on seizures that we did. I've seen field testing right on the spot.
Well, I've seen the field, but not putting it in your, taking a taste,
or rubbing it on your gums.
No, I never saw none of it. Never saw that, but I have seen field testing.
It's the reality of the situation. But there's been cases. I know of one specifically in Florida, where on a traffic stop of a fentanyl trafficker intentionally blew fentanyl into the face of a female deputy. And it ended up taking, two or more, at least two, I think if I remember right, 3 or 4 hits off of the Narcan inhaler to save her life. And, you could blow cocaine in somebody's face and they might feel good for a little while and they might amp up and work really hard, but they weren't going to drop dead on the spot.
Yeah. And like Pete said, I've never, ever seen an agent sit there and bust into a kilo of cocaine and rub his gums with it. Never. Brother, and I've been around a lot of drug busts.
Thanks, Miami Vice. Miami Vice and
that's Hollywood.
The Scarface movie with Al Pacino and all that for introducing that.
Let me jump in here and get us wrapped up because it's the evening and folks want to do this stuff. What a fantastic show, though, you guys. I really appreciate you both coming on. And look, we just had a challenging conversation about a lot of hard stuff. And I think we had a good time doing it. So my hats off to both you guys and to everybody watching. I hope you all enjoyed it. Ken, what do you want to sing? Oh, yeah, go ahead. I'll give you a sec, Hal. You're next.
Yeah.
Ken, wrap us up on your end.
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is God bless Hal and the work he does and the other people in our communities that are willing to do this. The narcotics consumer is simultaneously an offender in the eyes of the law and a victim in the eyes of society. And too many times, it's real easy to say, oh, it's their own fault. They make this choice. And that's not always the case. And it takes people like Hal to understand the humanity of those individuals and that it is their human frailty that's driving their illegal conduct. And it's not a break one or the other cycle. You can stop somebody to an extent from using drugs by incarcerating them. Drugs are available inside a facility, as both know, but you can stop at that, but you don't treat that innate desire in that individual to consume those narcotics and until you break that cycle. So I want to personally thank you, Hal, again, for the work you do. Highest respect and the love for you, my brother, for doing that, and the recognition that this is an ailment that you have to treat the whole person and look at the totality of those circumstances. There will always be people in the world that feed addictions. And there will always be people that exploit other human beings for profit and their own personal gain. And the only way that someone eventually overcomes that and gets well is not only to break the cycles we talked about at all, but also have that relationship with their Lord and Savior that's going to give them that reason for existence and that purpose in life and that obligation they have to others and that realization that they have self-value, that they themselves are a valuable creation of God that deserve respect not only from others but from themselves. They have to respect themselves. So complicated subject. We could go on for days with the years of experience here, but thanks, Hal. Thanks for bringing us together, Pete, and giving us the opportunity to go again.
Yeah, and Hal, wrap us up.
Yeah, I'd like to say in closing, Ken, it's been an honor getting to know you, sir, and your dedication to our country and your ability to be open-minded in conversations that are as sensitive as this one here today. Whether we believe in our president in the same way or not, I noticed a quality in you today where you were willing to listen. You were willing to accept another man's opinion, and you did not judge me for it. And to me, that is exactly what we needed to take upon, if you will, to our country right now, which is so divided with so much hatred and so much animosity because we elect and choose to think in different ways. So, Ken, my hat is off to you too. And it's been an honor getting to know you. And I think that your words of wisdom today will impact somebody out there. And you are right about the problem with those in the addicted community. Until we can teach them and show them and convince them that you have to change those two modicums, the people and the environment, they will never break away from the chain of addiction and lifestyle pattern, because it becomes familiar, and that which becomes familiar to us becomes comfortable to us, whether it's abusive or not. And Pete, as Ken said, I too wish to thank you for bringing us together today on what I felt was an amazing conversation. And I hope you both take with you, as we depart from this conversation tonight, how do we take fentanyl out of the Chinese equation? How do we stop it? I still think it's either diplomatically, politically, or hit the sons of bitches through the back door. What else can we do? It's not going to stop by us doing what we've been doing, because it's only manifesting more and more. But great topic, guys. Great conversation today. Thank you both, and God bless you both. And God bless the suffering out there. And let us keep them in our hearts always. Ken,
Amen.
sending you love, brother. You too, Pete.
Right back at
That's
you.
a 3-show day, everybody. 3 shows. How about that? Yeah, it's a big day here. We're proud of that on the Break It Down show. When we roll out 3 shows, that's always a banner day. Everybody, thank you, thank you, thank you. Subscribe if you're into that. If not, whatever. But also check out Hal's show. Look at this handsome devil right here. The Crisis Victory Show. Woo, man.
Yeah,
He
Pete's a
is
co-host, guys.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I am congratulating myself a little bit, and then Ken has been working with me on some episodes too, so
Yeah.
he's going to be doing more stuff as well. But the bottom line here is, everybody, thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll have another one, maybe 2. We'll see what happens, and I will see you all later, fellas. I'll see you guys in a second.
Take care.